Maybe, maybe while people come in, to be more rigorous with the time, we can maybe do a brief presentation. My name is Jorgelina Di Iorio. At this moment, I'm in Buenos Aires in Argentina, in Latin America, in South America, and it's 6 p.m., 6:10 p.m. So we invite everyone, when you present, tell us where you're at, because Zoom and virtuality maybe obscures our time zones and time and space, really. And in these encounters, we also want to showcase this diversity and diversity of places and hours, and to be able to share the sense that we have in this session. That's the purpose. So I'm going to be very brief, and I'm going to allow the other coordinators to speak as well for these next two sessions. First of all, we want to thank Emma and Christopher and the whole team and the organization for this conference. Not only through the tremendous organization that you generated with this Congress and all of these conferences, but also because we actually were rebellious with the order and with the agenda, and we try to make psychology more dynamic and community psychology. So we wanted to make the structure of this conference also dynamic. So we invited this, invented this as a table symposium. So we have a lot more time for discussion and to think together, which is what we really want. So we actually cheated a little bit, cheated the structure, the official structure, to have more space, especially because in this space, in this virtual Congress, we don't have coffee, we don't have cake or dinner, or these spaces where we used to meet physically, where many of us were finding each other, and we made huge friendships and bonds. But today it's great to see so many faces today. It would be beautiful to see you in person, but oh well. We thought it was important to recover this in the framework of community psychology, thinking about different perspectives in other areas and how we can recover not only political and academic dimensions, but affective and the ways in which we produce and we think about community psychology. And that is the true sense of these next two sessions that are going to be in the same room. We're going to continue them. One first until about 55 or 50. Then we'll have a small break so that the interpreters can rest for a few seconds, 5 or 10 minutes, so that they can rest and so they can go to the bathroom. In my case, I can drink some mate or some Argentinian tea, and then we'll have another space for discussion. And now I'm going to pass the ball over to Moses. He can tell us a little bit about the dynamic. Thank you very much, Jorgelina. So thank you very much for being here. In terms of what Jorgelina says, when we imagine this space in Havana, when we were in the SIP conference in Havana, and we started to imagine how we can try or attempt to have a different sort of space in congresses. Normally, summits or congresses are spaces where we have very little time to share. We're accustomed to present our reports and debating, and we wanted to build a very different space today. The truth is that what we imagined in Havana to what happened really is very different. It's an important leap because, unfortunately, that coronavirus appeared and changed all of our lives. And well, we have had to adapt. We would have never imagined that we would have had this space virtually via these little screens, via the internet, each of us from our own home. And I would have never imagined that jet lag of the Australian Congress would have been talking to you at 10 p.m. after working for 14 hours at home. I would have never imagined that I would have had jet lag in a virtual Congress in Australia. But we have adapted to our new situations, and I live this as one first step, a first experiment, so that we can all reflect and see if in the future it makes more sense to have different sorts of congresses, different spaces. We've been rethinking how we do things, and it should be a bit different. I only wanted to thank Jorgelina and James, which are the people that we've been working with the most, and Rodrigo and Nelly and Alicia, which very friendly. She actually allowed us to work with this experience, and to all of you for opened up your windows, opened up the spaces and participated. And I hope that we can enjoy it. And just to finish, I want to say that I want to really hug all of you, and I hope that soon we can truly hug each other. James. So the idea is that we create a space for dialogue and also creation of knowledge. As we come in at a symposium, which is about the discussion and a sense of community in conversational context in Latin America. And we're going to have a roundtable, which is talking about dialogues and movements in community psychology for social change. And we perceive that we, the people from Latin America, as always, we have our point or our objectives. Social change is always our purpose. And we're going to have our discussions, our proposals, our reiterations to try to perceive what would be our challenges, what actions we should take for change. So our first person that will present will be Nelly Ayala from the Catholic University of Colombia in Bogota, which will have a little bit of her considerations about the sense of community in her context. After that, we're going to have Rodrigo del Valle, which is in Chile, from the University of Valparaiso, which makes the discussions more epistemology speaking about what ideas related to community and the context where we're living, which ones we should confront. And at the end, we're going to have some discussions about a sense of community in Brazil. I'm James Mora, and I'm in Fortaleza in Brazil. It is 6 p.m. right now, 6:13 actually. So let's begin with Nelly. Thank you very much. Okay. Moment.
You see the screen? Okay, well, so in fact, we never imagined going through these conditions. I have to speak very fast because I only have 10 minutes. And I must say that I miss you. We have created such a huge community of affection that has allowed us to exchange, to build. And we're here in Colombia. It's 4:14 p.m. And I work at the Universidad Católica de Colombia, and this is the area where I live. I'm in Colombia, a country like many other Latin American countries, which is facing serious difficulties. And I'm going to highlight just one of the topics that is much more complex that we're experiencing in Colombia, which is related to the death and the crime of social leaders. This is something that is going beyond our reach, and together with that, all the issues related to corruption, inequality, and poverty. I work at Universidad Católica de Colombia. I want to highlight that the fact that the concentrations of that I will do will give sense to the work I'm doing. My university is not making the community psychology visible, but fortunately, I have a space of work which is a seed bed of investigation, and this is where we created what I'm going to present. The purpose of it is to generate the skills in my students in terms of the passion and the love of for community work. So last year, with 2 students, we were reflecting as to what is it that we could do, how we contribute from community psychology to achieve better conditions of life, how can we contribute to the reflection, to the criticism, to make sure that Colombians can live peacefully. We reached a peace accord in 2016, which has been vanishing, and that peace and it is not there because peace is not reflected on paper. So we developed some motivation, awareness videos that I could use in my class so that the students could see community psychology as an option for work because not many people register for that or sign up for that. So when we developed this video, we participated in an academic event nationwide which gathered community psychologists and professionals and students who were interested in this field of psychology. The day before this presentation, while talking to my students, we said, well, we have a very interesting audience. We need we have ideas that we can share. We have our own challenges. We felt that what we're doing is insufficient to contribute to the change in Colombia. So why don't we formulate a question to them to say what they say? How can we strengthen the sense of country in Colombia? And this is the scenario, this is the setting, just for you to understand why am I beginning here. This presentation has three different headings. You normally have one, but when I had the first one, then it led to the second and then to the third. The first one, history, identity, and diversity, which are the contents of community action to strengthen the sense of country in Colombia. Then I started thinking about this, and I said to build the community, the sense of community, you need to involve history, identity, and diversity. And then it leads to the question, how can we establish an epistemology in community psychology where involving history, identity, and diversity? Of course, this is something that we have normally discussed, but how can we do it? So we're using the sense of country, and the closest thing we found has to do with Montero's suggestions with national and Latin American identity, and the community aspect that we found is the sense of community, where I'm not going to provide any definitions. I think that for us in general terms, we know what this is all about, all the different suggestions where they're coming from, and the most important thing is that the sense of community becomes the connection among the different relations. It's that thing that lead people to wish to be together and to find the construction of a project of life in the benefit of everyone. So the question that we formulated in writing is, how can we favor the construction of a sense of country? So this is a study that we conducted from the hermeneutic perspective, a structured design. We did an analysis of the information with the Atlas team, and this was an intentional sample of 50 participants, 25 people who attended the event that I mentioned for community psychology, and 50 for the students on their last year of community psychology. Most of the participants were women. Most of them were from 18 to 29 years of age, and most of them psychologists, although we found a small percentage of lawyers and physicians. So we asked an open question. We have the different stages of the investigation. We had an exploration, we had the data systematized collection, and then one having to do with the data categorization and classification. These are the outcomes that we obtained. What you can see there is quite interesting, and it's the fact that the sense of country will be firstly associated with the history category, which is the one that has more codes associated there too, and then the collective one, and then diversity. But then you can see the critical thinking, participation, and the community construction. So the interesting thing is that for these people, in order for them to strengthen the sense of country, we need to consider, that's another question, who should we consider for this? It is not just the responsibility of community psychology. It involves the state, the civil society, higher education, the private entities. They need to understand that if we're committed to a change, there are certain characteristics that we need to take into account. That includes history, collective entity, diversity, critical thinking, participation and community construction and community building. So history. What history are we talking about? I took a definition of Fontana in 2006, which indicates that the history should raise awareness, critical awareness of the past, so that you can better understand the present by contributing elements to fight against the social mechanisms that give rise to poverty to inequality. And these are some expressions or thoughts of the participants with respect to history. One of them said, knowing the history of the country associated with both positive and negative events. Another one said, mainly doing history, strengthening all the different generations with respect to the historical memory of the country and involving the new generations in political participation. Now, with respect to collective identity, I brought a definition that, in my opinion, gives sense to the work, to the collective work, identity work. This is a subjective and changing construction, which includes the culture, um, the recognition of the environment, research, and the recognition of the other. And for culture, this is the expression, this is what one of the participants said, who said that it is fundamental to value oneself, your culture, the life, and the different resources. Now, with respect to the recognition of the environment resources, some of the participants indicated that this allows, in addition to strengthening the local development of all the different fields of knowledge, whether technology, academy related, with respect to globalization. Another person said that it allows each individual to share the potential aspects of the region. When we talked about the recognition of the other, some participants indicated, observe that we are not one among many, but we are so many that can make a change. But if we stop ignoring the one next to us, regardless of the differences these persons have, it's, we should not stop suffering for whatever is surrounding us. Now, with respect to diversity, this is something that is related with the intercultural approach, which involves the recognition of differences, especially inequalities and the different areas of social life, the cultural and economic life in a country. Now, in this section, it is interesting to hear the inclusion of the differences. One of the participants said that the recognition is based on the multiplicity and the diversity that is building us as a country. Another person by vindicating the cultural plurality and the different story practicals, myths, rhythms, and music. And then finally, recognizing the ancestral by knowing who we are, by accepting our roots, our origin, and there's our spiritual ancestral forces, gaining, having respect for the land and the earth, not only for the place, but also for the people who are part of it. Somebody else said, by recognizing the history of the country, the narrative of all the different peoples.
Entonces, conclusiones.
So to conclude, we need to involve history, but not any history, the collective identity, diversity, in order to favor the three critical thinking. So we can conclude with the question: how can we make this possible? How can we make an epistemology and community psychology involving history, identity, and diversity? This is something that we can write, but how can we make it possible? What history are we referring to? What's my story? What's when I'm a psychologist working as a person moving in the different environments? How am I contributing to the construction of the other? And to us in Colombia, it is really urgent to build a country from a dialogue, ethical, and humanizing posture, and this involves social actors. This work has led it to keep on investigating and inquiring how to make it possible. And we have suggested by us that assuming history has to be a critical instance that becomes is the key to interpret the Colombian reality. It being understood not as a mere repetition of past events, but the implementation of resistance and optimistic actions promoted by the strength of a new knowledge to determine new popular and ancestral wisdom approaches. So this becomes a core category which will promote the production of knowledge, which is critical in benefit of the development and the strengthening of communities. To build a collective entity from the recognition of difference to favor the understanding, maintenance, and development of symbols, rituals, traditions, values, beliefs, among others, from a perspective that should be love-based, ethic, and humanistic. We need to learn about this in the country. Recognizing cultural diversity favors the construction of a sense of country from the different global cosmovisions. Colombia is rich in terms of ancestral. We have a lot of indigenous communities. A couple of weeks ago, there was a movement of indigenous peoples, and they wanted to protest. And the first thing that people said is, how are they going to move for so many kilometers in their buses and their typical buses, chivas? This is going to be a whole mess. And they showed that they were so ethical, and they did such a peaceful manifestation. They were hosted in some places, and when their camps were raised, everything was neat and clean. And they taught us that there is a huge cosmovision that we need to learn from. The construction of a new sense of country is only possible if more social awareness levels are developed, which allow reading reality in a critical and propositive way, understanding, among other aspects, the role of the economic development models in the social building of reality. And we have not understood that. And just to say that the photos and images that you can see are Colombian, and they're from the repository of investigation seedbed that I am leading. It's just for you to have that information, and that way we can share more information afterwards.
Thank you, Nelly, for your presentation. And applauses, try to applause however you can with your hands. I don't know. At least some reaction, as Ruben is doing right there. Now I want to give the word over to Rodrigo, whom those of you that entered late, let's tell you a little bit about the dynamic. And we also love that we found each other, because for us, this is the affectionate encounter that we don't have personally. So seeing Sandra, Ruben, Alicia, all of us that we know each other, and those that we don't know each other either, what we did was we united two different tables, and some presentations seem to speak about things about the previous world, pre-pandemic. And then we're going to see some that make us think about the pandemic, because this is the transition that we're actually living in, or we're thinking about in the same moment in which we're living. So we take advantage of this opportunity, this Congress, to gather, to ask ourselves questions. And based on these presentations, the first one that Nelly did from Colombia, now Rodrigo is going to present, and another presentation is going to be done by James in the first block of this session. Then we'll have a small break so interpreters can also have a break, and then we'll continue with the following session with the same link. Please don't leave, and we'll ask people questions about these presentations. And I'm going to ask about some questions. They're in Spanish. The questions are in Spanish. I can try to have somebody translate it, because this is also collective translation. And let's use the chat box, so not only to greet each other, but to ask questions and comment, because our intention is to ask ourselves questions especially about the sense of these interventions, about community psychology, where these practices should go to think about social change, how much creation and different ways to produce change exist. What effects, when we think about the pandemic, what effects have we found in communities, especially in some presentations that were actually written pre-pandemic, and now we're observing many modifications. How is the pandemic changing our field of knowledge, not only in research, but also in terms of summits and congresses and training, which are questions that we want to open up the floor for discussion. And we want to ask presentations to these presentations. What's the purpose? And that's why we set aside 2 different blocks. Let me remind you, when you ask for the word, say where you're at and what time it is where you're at, so that we can actually cheat time and space in Zoom, because that'll make us think we're all in the same place and in the same time. Rodrigo? Very good day. A very special greeting to everyone. I am going to set up my screen. Are we okay?
Ahí estamos, sí. Se ve mi
Can
pantalla.
you see my screen? Perfect. Very well. My name is Rodrigo Cabrera. I'm speaking from Chile, from Valparaíso. I'm a professor of Valparaíso University. It's actually 6:33 p.m. right now in Chile. What else did I have to say? I think that was it, right? Perfect. Okay. All of these emotions that have been described here, I obviously want to greet all of my colleagues and friends, men and women from all parts of the women, and this beautiful network that we have in Latin America and beyond. And I am going to propose 2 or 3 ideas, recovering a few things related to the concepts that we had in our initial dialogue table. Nelly presented a practical experience, a research-based experience, and I'm going to say 3 additional things. First, about the concept, the trajectory of the concept. We know that the community concept is an old concept. It has a lot of ideas behind it. The issue is that when we find a lot of the bibliographies related to concepts, it's interesting because the concept and the sense of community, despite being proposed as something being collective, many times it falls back on issues that are more individual. What am I referring to here? That there's a great deal of instruments that have a sense of community, and that great deal of instruments seem to be like more traditional based in psychology, that are linked mainly to an element that would exist in people instead of the unity of everyone. Therefore, we propose an element such as individuality, where we would put to the side different issues with which is what is evidently collective, which was what I'm going to talk about at the end, which generates a question that for us Latin American people is very complex, because it's like the concept becomes a little bit ambiguous. So the duality concept is a bit excluding in the past, because it seems that a kid that runs to one side and the community runs to the other side, and they would never meet each other. That's the duality. So there's a tension here in my way of seeing things, in this false dualism. And it's very strange, because we're going to measure the sense of community and with these instruments that many of you know, or at least the traditional psychologists have studied more about these instruments, and the Chavez and Macmillan versions. And it tells us that we have to measure communities. And apart from that, we're going to measure it individually speaking, something which is crazy or curious. Therefore, when we propose certain things that we've been checking, it says, here we find certain perspectives that are more philosophical and more than exclusive, that idea of liberalism versus communitalism. These are elements that are interesting. The question that comes to mind in terms of this is, well, and if we're going to propose this in individual terms from traditional psychology, how does the figure of I emerge if we're going to configure this from a psychological perspective? Therefore, perhaps more linked to this psychometry, more rational based, more experiment based, if you want to call it that, or if we're going to consider it the building of the I or the ego within the cultural perspective that's historical, that would allow us to better discuss the concepts. Here we find the old role of the philosopher, the liberal philosopher, that proposes that finally it seems that the subject is the one that decides and he or she selects the future. That's what the liberals defined in the traditions or the traditional explanations. The problem here lies in what happens or what would happen if each of the individual subjects would be thinking about what their community is, which maybe you would have one subject thinking one thing, one thinking historical, thinking a little bit. I always give the example of Latache said, I don't see groups nor I see societies, I only see individuals. That was the practice of liberalism when Thatcher decided to talk about well-being in England. And there we have one first problem, and I think Nelly talked about this very powerfully in her presentation. We are going to conceive a subject, the building of the ego, the building of the I, without any characteristics that could truly define that person. Why do I say that? Because the building or the construction of the subject that we see from this point of view will always be part of a matrix or a culture, which is going to be determined by what things? When we talk about Taylor's idea, and I suppose that Nelly spoke a little bit about Taylor's idea when she talked about the broad ideas, when Taylor begins to ask himself, what are the elements that actually constitute a community? Taylor proposed certain concepts: equality, nationalism, patriotism, populism, neutrality, but finally the idea of a community. There are several authors that say, well, what are going to be the elements that we're going to have within these concepts that we have as a community? And tension related to liberalism has to do with, since there's no pre-existing element that is linked with the collective elements, each community or each group or each society is going to define previously or before or practically what exactly is going to be. So we will be in the presence of an a-valuable item. What is proposed is, for example, that liberalism actually omits common sense as the great value structure and not in the agreements. What is Taylor's idea of community liberalism? And why does he propose it? Never forget that Taylor also uses this in a Canadian context with elements that Nelly also talked about, with the idea of issues related to the original people or First Nations and that type of thing. What is Taylor saying about this? It's how can we configure the I as a function of the collective to consider elements that are linked to this collective. And here appears a concept which I think is also very complex, especially in Latin America, the issue of liberty and the state. and the position of the state. We know in Latin America, we have states which are weak, very weak or fragile. Let's not complicate the translator's life with complicated words. And therefore, what is the idea to reconfigure and rescue this sense of community that I said was proposed from the very beginning in individual or collective terms? The idea of a construction. We have the concept of the I, basically, but from a collective nature at a historical level, culturally located and culturally specific. The idea that communityness has to be a defense to cultural particularities against liberal universality. So we start to highlight everything that has to do with critical social sciences, critical methodologies, the ideas of questioning rationality, questioning neoliberalism, and questioning elements that the scientific method can even give us in such a way that we have a state that is capable to link and reconfigure all the possible pictures in different societies and different territories. Why? To propose that, effectively speaking, and there I recover the idea of the politicians and the sense of community, that the state proposes that we're going to move within the confirmation and the configuration of certain values previously established, where people will inhabit, and in that way, there will emerge the idea of an I within the configuration of elements that are historically situated, basically speaking. I hope I didn't go too fast. I hope you understood. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rodrigo.
Perfecto.
Perfect.
Entonces voy a compartir también.
So I'm going to share my screen. My name is James. Look, I can't share my screen. It seems like I don't have permissions.
I will give you permission. 1 second.
No pagaste suficiente, James.
There it goes. Okay, we authorize you. Finally, this is the democracy. Thank you very much. But you're going to remove my privileges. Can you see my screen? Okay. So what would be the role of psychology and social change? My name is James Mugara. I'm from Brazil. I'm here in Brazil at 6 p.m., 6:44 in Fortaleza. I'm part of a university called the University of Universal Integration of Brazil, which is located in the interior of the country. It's not in the capital. And I would like to begin by speaking about what community is. The idea is that we perceive community to be a concrete context, but it also involves symbolic spaces, geographically and socially speaking, that has a relationship with society and has conflicts and potentials with relations of neighboring, but also with perspectives that these relationships can also be positive as well as negative, that people can have their construction from that collective perspective, as Rodrigo said, in a perspective of a sense of being part of a determined community. And which communities are these? These are crossed by different social perspectives. This is a photograph of the capital of Fortaleza, which is very, very structured with a huge social inequality. You can see the poverty that is very, very close to the wealth. So the communities are in context of social conflict, and also in the process of pandemic, which is one of the issues that we're facing. We've seen an increase of poverty and an increase of that the population is going to get poorer in the near future as a consequences of the measures of COVID. And there is also a very structured question that in the pandemic is a historic, which historic in Brazil. A woman is murdered every 4 hours and 50 minutes. So this is a structural pandemic, really. In a more emblematic fashion, Mariela was a politician in Rio, and they still haven't identified the people that ordered her killing. And the idea with this structural perspective is to have a sense of community, of women in situation of poverty in the department in Brazil or the state. We had a qualitative perspective, community insertion in the city of Retención with 10 women. We interviewed them. And it's important to clarify that the process of community insertion was involved with the process of investigation. And now we already have, like in our community, because we have a very strong relationship between research and action. We have a project, a university extension project with women from the community with a focus on going through inclusion process with the building of handbags and handicraft with these women so they can actually bring their histories and their potentials in that process of construction. And we started this last year with these women. So where are we located? This is Brazil. This is the university. This is where the university where I work. And this is a bit of the context. It's a university that is in a smaller city in Brazil that has a more arid or dry context with factors that are structural factors which are very weak, which are part of a history or poverty historical perspective. And we have certain let's understand these paradoxes. So what perspectives we're working with these women, that they speak about the sense of community as well as all the possible conflicts that they are living. And a woman says, when we yell, daughter, we're a family. When one suffers, all of us suffers. And if one has suffered, all of us suffer. If one smiles, all of us smiles. I think the community is united because we are friends. That's the strength of the community. This is in Spanish, but I was reading it in Portuguese. And there's a perspective of the communities that has issues related to isolation, oppression. It was the community was silent. It was more peaceful, but also because the population was small. And now there are people that are selling their homes. There's a great deal of new residents. The population used to be smaller, and we each knew each other, right? Since the processes that happen in these countries, they used to have a greater sense of community, and now more people are coming in, and that sense of community is weakening. And also, they don't understand that they're going to do things in the community in a collective fashion. I told her, I don't think that this is going to work. So she asked me why. And I said, it's very easy for you to say that it's going to work when it's the moment to see who is going to show up. And she said, nobody is there to do it. Nobody has been in these moments. And as a consequence, and this affects women much more. And the idea is that one of the women that is part of the investigation says, women still have many difficulties. They still depend completely on their partners or on social government programs. But I believe that the majority of them continue to be very dependent from their partners, because mainly in a small town, girls get pregnant very early and they lose out on opportunities. and then they become the caretaker of their family. And the man many times does not assume the responsibility, and they end up benefiting from her. He has more opportunities to work, to have better education than her. There's a lack of work, there's a lack of opportunities, very low pay, because sometimes in fact you have a job offer, but when the salary is not decent, when it's a very low salary, you work maybe as a maid in a family home, which is very common, and that's even below minimum wage. They're not really well paid. So in that perspective, where there's a patriarchy in a structured fashions, and that the consequences of poverty are different for men than they are for women in these community contexts, then we perceive that community psychology for social change must be based on radicalizing communities and fine-tuning on gender-based approaches, because there's an intersection with race as well. The majority of women in these communities are also Black and or Indigenous. So we have a concentration of women in these processes which are submodern, and men have more privileges. So we need to think about actions that are different for different groups and for different genders that are part of these communities. And in terms of concrete actions that have to be symbolic, with a focus on the collective community, with practices related to intersectional gender and community. So what can we create in the community? What can we create, or what possibilities related to gender or community relations or sense of belonging? Thank you very much. I think that Angelina goes next.
Well, I think we have, I think we're gonna have like a coffee break, because I think we're wrapping up. We're wrapping up. We're going to maintain the same Zoom space, but we're going to have like a small break so that the interpreters can rest a little bit.
What the hell they fighting for? Now the man with the blaming us further apart, but they do not know you can't rule another's heart. You can't get a